Hello and good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this video. Today, we have Mr. Teo Salgado, who's an independent educational consultant who founded VerveSmith 7 years ago, and we'll know more about this in a few minutes. But before we get going, I'll let you know about what you're going to listen in this session. In this session, you are going to learn more about the undergraduate education in Canada. You'll listen about some of the most popular majors that international students study in Canada. You'll listen about some of the most popular universities and the cost of education in Canada. And finally, you will also hear about the application process to these universities. So welcome, Teo. It's a pleasure to have you here, and we're looking forward to learning more about undergraduate education in Canada.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation, Devesh and Niraj.
Superb. So before we get going, let me briefly introduce Teo. Teo Salgado is an independent educational consultant based in Toronto, Ontario. He's a highly regarded educational profession with more than 20 years of experience in international student recruitment, admissions counseling, and alumni relations at UToronto and Western University. In recognition of his professionalism and service orientation, he was awarded the University of Toronto's Simcoe Hall Vice President's Staff Award in 2013. Teo completed an honors Bachelor of Arts degree with high distinction at the University of Toronto and a Master of Arts degree at McGill University in Montreal. To remain current on university admission processes, Teo completed the graduate certificate in college admissions counseling at UCLA and completed the IECA, that's Independent Educational Consultant Association's Summer Institute Training Program at Swarthmore College in 2015. A certified project manager, he will ensure you stay on schedule. And in addition to English, Teo is fluent in Spanish and Portuguese. It's great to have you here, Teo, and we are excited to learn more about the whole undergraduate education in the Canada. Let's get going. My first question to you is if you could tell us about what are some of the most popular majors or courses or programs that you see students studying in Canada?
Sure. And to get started there, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share a screen that has a chart showing the most popular majors according to the Ontario University's Application Center. So there's very little information that is gathered centrally for Canadian universities. And in fact, when I was doing research in preparations for a series of talks that I'm doing, I realized that this kind of information is very difficult to find in most countries. So I was really grateful to be able to get some information on the US in the Canadian setting here in Ontario. And one of the things that we see is that there's a shift away from the arts and humanities. The proportion of total applications a few years ago, maybe I think it was about 3 or 4 years ago, was about 37%. Now it's in the low 20s. Meanwhile, applications to STEM and health-related programs continues to rise. Applications to biological and biomedical sciences continued their upward march, up 14.6% this year, while applications to nursing rose 15.3%, and to health professions and related programs, the increase was 18.3%. And I think that really is a reflection of the situation that we find ourselves in right now with COVID-19. While applications to engineering remain steady, rising only 3.1%. That's the yellow line that you see here in the graph. It's, applications to computer science program continued their upward trend, increasing by 12.7%. And that is the gray line here. So, and again, I think that this increase is in part due to, yes, there was a general trend already where computer science programs were increasingly important, but I think that COVID has exacerbated that trend and just sped up the development of that trend. So where are the students applying? I think one of the questions that we're going to answer, talk about a little bit later, is where, what are the most popular universities in Canada? And but I think it's important to first talk about, where students are applying. And really what they're doing is they're applying to schools that are recognized for being strong in STEM as a result of the types of programs that are seeing growth. First choice applications to McMaster University increased 16.2% year over year. This is from last year to this last application cycle. Western, the applications increased by 12%, and to Waterloo, 8.7%, and the University of Toronto, 8.4%, respectively. Now, we should say that Waterloo and U of T were already getting a lot of applications, so that actually is a significant jump when you think about the base from which they started. Interestingly, there was a 2% decrease in first choice applications to Queen's University, but an overall of 13.5%, which was the highest overall jump in applications in the Ontario system. The other interesting number is the 9.9% increase in first choice applications and 35.6% increase in applications to overall to Algoma University. And I think that that's an interesting development, because Algoma has not traditionally been a university that sees a lot of applications. It could be that their numbers were so small that any significant increase would have been reflected in percentages in this way. But I think also it may have to do with its location in the small class sizes. So people were looking for places where they can still get together and still have freedom of movement. And Algoma University is in a city where that was still possible. Now, to put this in context, I think, so that maybe we can, extrapolate this to a larger population. It was interesting. I went to a UC Irvine presentation last year where we were told that admission officers reviewed a record 108,000 applications for freshman spots. Half of those students applied to just 6 of the 85 majors that they offer. Biological sciences was the top choice, which was selected by nearly 12,000 applicants. And the other popular majors were business administration, nursing science, computer science, and psychology, which really mirrors what we're seeing in Ontario. So I think, when you have, the Ontario system and, a university in the University of California system with numbers that are similar, I think maybe we can say that it could be part of a larger trend. So when you're thinking about, which are going to be the more competitive majors, and this has been the case for a very long time already, but you have business and engineering among the top. And then as a result of the pandemic, I think that we're seeing big increases in areas like nursing, the biological sciences, and then also in psychology.
Fantastic. Thanks for sharing that information. Very insightful. And as we are based here in India, I can totally see that Canada is sort of gaining pace. There are a lot of students now looking at Canadian education, right? Undergraduate education in Canada. And you mentioned some of these universities, and I think a lot of students, and the rise in the number of applications at these universities is pretty evident here as well. We are seeing that the rate at which the number of applicants who are looking at Canada is going at a terrific pace. It's growing very fast. And I was just seeing this data, and we can clearly see that although commerce and management, that is in real number terms, though that remains to be a very popular major, but you can see computer science as a major growing pretty fast, and same would be the case with biological and biomedical sciences. So that's great. Okay, so that brings me to my next question, and that is, if you could tell us what are some of the universities, some of the most popular universities that students are looking at when it comes to Canada?
Well, the most popular universities in Canada tend to be in large urban centers, right? So I think, when people think about Canada, they're thinking primarily of 3, maybe 4 universities. And, starting from the East Coast, you have McGill University in Montreal, the University of Toronto in Toronto, and the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. So those are traditionally the most popular universities in Canada. But we're seeing that there's a lot more interesting universities outside of these urban centers. So, in the last maybe 10 years, we've seen a significant increase in interest in the University of Waterloo. And I think in part, it's a reflection of its strength in STEM, right? Particularly in engineering programs. So as there's been an increased growth in interest in engineering, universities that are recognized for those strengths in those program areas are starting to see much more interest from international students. And the University of Waterloo recognized for engineering, but I think, something that a lot of people talk about when they're thinking about Waterloo, of course, is their computer science programs, their math department. So there's been an increase in interest in the University of Waterloo as well. There's a lot of other universities in Ontario that are also benefiting as people become much more familiar with Ontario universities, with Canadian universities. You're starting to see a spillover effect to some universities like the ones I've mentioned recently, right? Like Western, McMaster, Queen's. Out on the West Coast, you have Simon Fraser University, and in Montreal, there's Concordia, also in the cities. But they tend to be close to large urban centers. And that is, I think, one of the things that really defines where international students are coming to in Canada. It's close to large urban centers. And I think that they're missing the boat because there's a lot of good places, a lot of really strong universities outside of those large urban centers, and I wish more people would consider.
Absolutely. I think this might be the early years for us as we start learning more about Canadian universities. And in India also, we are seeing a lot of these universities they have an Indian representative who are sort of helping Indian students understand the programs at the universities outside of the big four or the big five, the top five universities in Canada. And gradually we can see that students will start looking at more universities, and I believe sessions like this will help them look beyond the top 10 universities in Canada. Absolutely. So, Teo, let's if you could help us also understand about the cost structure or the fees at these universities. How, what will be the education cost be like? Yes, great.
Yeah, and there really is a very big gulf in the cost of education here in Canada for international students. Really, I think in part the fees are driven to a large degree by location and demand, right?
Okay.
So if you have a lot of students that are applying to universities, they feel that they're able to raise their fees a little bit higher than universities that maybe aren't seeing the same numbers, who want to entice people to apply to those universities. The other thing, I think, when you're looking at universities that have an international brand, they realize that students who are considering them are likely also considering peer institutions, right? So they're going to set their tuition fees at a rate that is similar to what their peers internationally are applying. So, and you see that reflected in the University of Toronto's fees, right? Or British Columbia's fees.
Yeah.
They're substantially higher than they are in most other places in Canada. So you're looking at about $47,000, for commerce or engineering programs at the University of Toronto, and at British Columbia you're looking at about $31,000 for the first year. I think that goes up for some programs after first year. So one of the things that students have to be careful with is that in the case of some universities, the first year might be priced at the arts and science fee. But then after first year, once you get into a program like commerce, right, that often has differentiated fees, the price of tuition could jump up significantly. So I encourage students that are considering Canadian universities to look beyond the first year fees, because there's a chance that they can jump up. And you'll notice from this table that there are some really good options outside of the main urban centers that I mentioned to you. right? Like, in Newfoundland, you can study for about 11,000 Canadian dollars, for like a program for about $11,000. That would be, that's the most expensive and the least expensive fee that you'll find there. Quebec universities are still a good deal for arts and science. For engineering and commerce programs, the fees jump up quite a bit, so they're more in line with what you have at British Columbia and at Toronto. And again, it's because of the fact that universities know that these are the programs that are attracting a lot of students, so they're able to raise their fees for that. But for arts and science programs, you're still finding fees around the $16,000 tuition range for universities in Quebec. So there's really good deals for some program areas. So for those students that are interested in, say, the sciences, right, biological sciences, biomedical sciences, there's a good opportunity there. For engineering and commerce, that's a different story because those fees tend to be deregulated, and universities can set fees at different ranges. The University of Saskatchewan, again, right? Really great university in Saskatoon. I happen to have visited this summer, even though we weren't able to visit very many places this year. I made my holiday trip this year to Saskatchewan, and I was able to visit this campus that was just incredibly beautiful. And Saskatoon is an incredible, small city, but $16,000 for really a great undergraduate education there. Same thing with Manitoba, and you see that in Alberta as well, that there's a very big gulf in the fees.
Superb. That's really helpful information. I mean, I was not aware that there can be such a massive difference between the popular universities, popular courses, and the universities which are not so popular, but offer the same quality of education for students, or similar quality of education, I would say. Yeah.
Well, Devesh, and actually you were right in saying that they offer same quality of education, right? One of the things about the Canadian education system is that there's 97 universities that are part of Universities Canada. In total, I think there's only 105 universities, so of 8 private universities, and they tend not to be the universities that students are normally looking to, right? So those 97 universities that students are considering, they're public institutions, they're institutions that receive their funding from government. In order to deliver those programs, they have to be vetted, right, in order to ensure that they're offering a good quality program, especially in fields like engineering, where not only do they have to pass the litmus test for government funding, but then also the professional associations in each province has to make sure that the engineers that are going through the program are learning the material that they have to know in order to practice as engineers. So the quality of the programs tends to be very strong right across the universities in the system, right? The difference will be in the kind of experience that students can expect on campus. So for example, some of the larger universities, the universities that charge more in fees, of course, they're going to be able to offer more experiences outside of the classroom. Maybe because they're research-intensive universities, you might have more opportunities to do research in an area of particular interest, or they fund student activities at a higher level. So it might be possible for you to participate in the building of a solar race car, which goes on to compete in Australia, for example, right? That's where the differences come. In the classroom, you won't notice, right? The quality of the education, the material that you're learning will be consistently strong right across Canadian universities.
That's fantastic. And I'm just trying to extrapolate the data that we are seeing. I mean, as students find this out, that there is a tremendous difference between the fee structures at different universities, and as the applications to some of these universities where the fees is very low, they will get more popular, and eventually that cycle will begin. They'll probably raise the fees gradually in the coming years.
Well, I get that generally is the trend, but I don't know. I don't know if that'll happen. I mean, I think in some of these provinces, the fees have been at that level for quite a long time. The other thing you have to recall is that Canada, unlike India, is a country that really needs new immigrants, right, in order to keep the population at a level that is sustainable. And so government will use education as a way to attract prospective, future Canadians. And especially in provinces where there's maybe a decrease in population, so usually in the East Coast and in the prairies, one of the things that the governments there do is they realize that they have to subsidize education to attract young people who may stay in their provinces once they graduate.
Wow, that's wonderful to know. Okay, so Teo, we are now coming to the next part of the presentation, and if you could help us understand about how can students apply to these universities, what is the general application process for?
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah, so the application process is very, I think, straightforward. Applications to Canadian universities can be completed through either centralized application systems like those in Alberta, Nova Scotia, British Columbia, and Ontario, or through university-specific applications. There is no country-wide application. In general, the application process involves two steps. The first step requires students to visit one of the application system portals or the university-specific website and provide biographic and academic preferences. That's it, right? You tell us a little bit about who you are, what programs you're interested in, and then each of the universities on your list is then notified of your application, and each provides access to your to an application portal, an applicant portal. And it's there that you're going to track the requirements. You need to ensure that you check your email and that periodically you're checking the portal to ensure that you don't miss any requirements. Supplementary essays and interviews are usually posted in the portals. So you do all of those things through the portals themselves. So, the 105 application recently went live. So 105 in Ontario, the 105 application is the application that is used by international students to submit their applications. So that recently went live. The UBC's application, I believe, goes live the first week of October, and I think McGill's also goes live on October 1st. So the date on which applications go live is inconsistent. There isn't like a consistent date on which you know that you're going to be applying. There, you have to check each of the universities on your list, or each of the systems on your list in order to find out when the portals are open. But generally, the timelines are a little bit later than that students that are thinking about the US or the United Kingdom would be used to. Applications here generally open later, late September, early October. Now, the deadlines, Ontario universities set a deadline of January 13, and then Dalhousie University in Halifax, for example, their deadline is March 1st for out-of-province students. McGill is February 1st, UBC is January 15th. So you can see that even the dates are a little bit kind of like all over the place. What I generally suggest is for students to submit their application by December 1st. Why? Because these applications are really easy to complete, right? So, if you know where you want to apply, why wouldn't you get this done as early as possible? Some of these applications take as little as 15, 20 minutes to complete, right? Once you kind of make your way through them. So if you know what you're applying to, you know where you're applying, there's no reason why you couldn't complete this fairly quickly. That's completing the first step, right? That's the easy part. Now, writing the essays, doing the interviews, that would require a little bit of preparation, that requires some thought. But those deadlines tend to be much later in the cycle. So, some universities might not require their essays or their interviews until like February or March. So you have a little bit of time. In the case of UBC, which, they have their own centralized application, even though there is a UBC province-wide system, you could apply directly to the University of British Columbia. In their case, though, you have to do the application on one shot, right? So, well, you don't have to do it in one shot. Actually, you can work your way through the application with time, but you're submitting your essays at the time that you're completing your application, right? So you really need to have thought about what it is that you're going to do when you're working your way through the UBC application.
Fantastic. Thanks for sharing that.
Yes. One thing, Devesh, and I really should mention this because I know a lot of students are going to be applying to the University of Toronto. If you're applying to U of T and you're applying from outside of Canada as an international student, you need to submit your application by the first week of November. They receive so many applications that they put people in a queue, and you want to get into that queue as early as possible, because if they evaluate your file and there's a chance that by the time you submit late, there's a chance that by the time they process your application, they've run out of spots for some of the programs. So you need to make sure that you apply as early as possible.
Wonderful. Thanks for sharing all those insights with us, Teo. Are there any scholarships offered to international students at these universities?
Yeah, there are scholarships that are offered, but to be frank, they're very competitive. Right? So some universities will have scholarships that you don't have to apply for. You simply, just the mere fact that you've submitted an application, you're going to be considered for those automatic entry merit-based scholarships. Some universities will have scholarships that are specifically targeted at students who are completing the IB system. I think there's a handful, I think it's 5 or 6 schools that do that. And then there are other schools that will have other scholarships that will look at things other than your grades. So they're going to be interested in the kind of extracurricular activities that you've been involved in, the impact that you've had at school, in your community. So they're going to look at things other than your grades. Your grades might be part of the things that they're looking at, but they're interested in more than just your grades. They're looking at the impact that you've had in your community. You know, the Pearson Scholarship, for example, is one that comes to mind at the University of Toronto. So that's it's a very prestigious scholarship. It's a very large scholarship. It's also a very competitive scholarship, and you'll find that those scholarships at universities right across Canada will tend to be very competitive. UBC has a set of scholarships for international students, which again, there's one that is automatic. You just have to apply. Again, you have to do it by a certain date. And then the other one is needs-based. So you will have to be nominated. You have to complete some information to ensure that that students are considered not just on merit, but also on financial need. So there's a smattering of scholarships right across the country. But I think the number one thing that students can do to control their cost, and as I showed you in the previous slide, right, it really comes down to, if cost is going to be an issue, because scholarships are so competitive, the number one thing that you can do to manage the cost of your post-secondary studies is apply to universities that have lower fees, right? Off the bat, you're getting the equivalent of a scholarship.
Absolutely. I think that's really a great advice. And I mean, this would open so many eyes. I mean, people, I'm not sure if you are aware of this, but I was surely not. And if there's so massive difference, I think there is a great opportunity here. Look beyond rankings, start looking at other factors as well. I mean, Canadian education and the fees that you showed, I mean, a couple of fees, if I convert into Indian rupees, the fees of some of these universities would be lower than what a lot of Indian universities are charging. So,
oh geez, wow,
so
that is pretty incredible. Don't let them know.
So superb. Thank you so much, Teo. It was a pleasure to have this conversation with you and to learn so much about undergraduate education in Canada. To all the students who watch this, we'll add link to Teo's website and his email ID. So feel free to connect with him and sort of learn more about the education or the application process and things like that. And yeah, and before closing, Teo, if there is any final piece of advice that you would like to share with high school students who are considering Canada,
Sure. I think do your research. Make sure that you take a little bit of time each day to learn about universities beyond the ones that you've heard of, because there's a lot of good options in Canada. And I think you just have to go out and spend a little bit of time looking for them.
Wonderful. Thanks for that advice. And thank you for joining this session. It was a pleasure having this conversation with you.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me, Devesh.